My name is Ezekiel, and I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, family gatherings meant one thing, being the designated disappointment. The whispers, the side glances, the not-so-subtle comparisons to my successful siblings. The words that cut deepest came during Thanksgiving 3 years ago. You're always the embarrassment. Well, those words became my fuel. When I finally bought my dream house after years of hard work, I knew exactly how to celebrate. Before I dive into how I finally showed my family what they were missing, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the family outcast and stayed to see how I turned the tables on them. I grew up in a middle-class suburb outside of Boston, in a pristine colonial home with perfectly manicured lawns and expectations to match. My father, Dr. Harold Montgomery, was a respected cardiac surgeon at Massachusetts General, and my mother, Miranda, was a corporate lawyer for one of the biggest firms in the city. Then there were my siblings. My sister Rachel, 2 years older, the academic prodigy, headed for an Ivy League future, and my brother Thomas, 2 years younger, the athletic star, who never seemed to lose at anything. And then there was me stuck in the middle, never quite fitting the Montgomery family mold. From an early age, it was clear I marched to the beat of a different drum. While my siblings excelled at math competitions and sports tournaments, I was drawn to art, music, and stories. I spent hours in my room creating elaborate worlds with colored pencils and paper, building sculptures from things I found around the house, or writing stories that took me far away from the suffocating pressure of perfection that filled our home. The first time I really understood I was different was when I was 8 years old. The school science fair was coming up, and while other kids were building volcanoes or growing plants, I had a different vision. I created what I thought was a masterpiece, an artistic representation of the water cycle using a combination of painting small motors and blue-tinted water that actually circulated through the display. I spent weeks on it, staying up late, fingers stained with paint and glue. When I proudly showed my parents, my father frowned and asked, "But where's the scientific method? Where's your hypothesis?" My mother added, "Honey, this looks like an art project, not science. The other kids will have real experiments." They suggested I start over with something more appropriate. I didn't. I submitted my project anyway. The judges gave me an honorable mention for creativity, but at home, that recognition wasn't mentioned. Instead, the focus was on how I had missed the point of a science fair. Then there was the annual family portrait session when I was 10. The photographer had positioned us all perfectly on a garden bench in our backyard. My mother had selected matching outfits in navy and cream. Just before the photographer clicked the shutter, I made a silly face. My father gripped my shoulder hard and whispered in my ear, "Can you act normal for once? Just once." The resulting photo shows everyone smiling perfectly and me with a strained expression that couldn't hide the hurt in my eyes. When I was 12, I landed the lead in the school play Romeo and Juliet. I was ecstatic and practiced my lines for weeks. The night of the performance, I scanned the audience repeatedly, looking for my parents. They had promised to be there, but their seats remained empty until intermission, when my mother slipped in alone. Later I learned they had attended my sister's debate competition that same evening, even though she only had a minor speaking role. My mother explained, "Your sister's academic achievements are important for her future, Ezekiel. This plaything is just, well, it's nice you're having fun." My artistic talents and sensitive nature were consistently framed as weaknesses rather than strengths. When I cried after my artwork was accidentally damaged by my brother, I was told to toughen up. When I spent hours perfecting a drawing, my father would ask, "Don't you have homework to do?" The message was clear. My passions were frivolous distractions from what really mattered. Family gatherings became theaters of anxiety for me. Aunts and uncles would ask my siblings about their achievements, grades, and trophies. When they turned to me, my parents would often jump in, with Ezekiel is still finding his way, as if I were lost, while my siblings followed clear, respectable paths. During our annual 4th of July barbecue when I was 13, I overheard my father talking to my uncle. "The boy just doesn't apply himself to anything useful. All this drawing and daydreaming won't get him anywhere in life. I'm concerned about his future." My uncle nodded sympathetically. Unaware I was standing just around the corner, my plate of food growing cold in my hands. The comments grew more passive-aggressive as I entered my teens. "That's an interesting outfit choice, Ezekiel. Bold." Or, "Well, not everyone can be good at math like Rachel and Thomas." Or, my personal favorite, "It's just a phase. He'll grow out of it and get serious eventually." By the time I was 16, I had developed a thick outer shell, at least when I was around my family. I became quieter at family events, answering questions, with minimal information, avoiding sharing my passions or interests. I learned to deflect and change the subject. I developed a defensive humor that kept people at arm's length. Inside, though, each dismissal and comparison cut deep, carving away at my sense of self-worth. I found refuge in my high school art room, where my teacher, Mrs. Lambert, treated my creativity like a gift rather than a defect. Under her guidance, I began to develop a distinct style, a way of seeing and interpreting the world that was uniquely mine. For the first time, I felt seen and appreciated for who I actually was, not judged for who I wasn't. But at home, the pattern continued. While my siblings' rooms featured shelves of trophies and academic awards, my artwork never made it onto the family room walls. My achievements in art competitions were acknowledged with polite nods rather than celebration dinners. And slowly, the vision I had of my future began to form one where I would finally prove that my different path wasn't a wrong one. When the time came to apply for colleges, I knew exactly what I wanted, even if it meant facing another wave of family disapproval. While my sister was at Harvard and my brother was fielding offers from top pre-med programs, I set my sights on the Rhode Island School of Design. My portfolio was strong, filled with the pieces I had created under Mrs. Lambert's mentorship, and when the acceptance letter arrived, I felt a surge of validation that this was the right path for me. The family dinner where I announced my college choice remains etched in my memory. We were having pot roast, my father's favorite, and everyone was discussing Rachel's summer internship at a prestigious law firm. I waited for a pause in the conversation, then shared my news as casually as possible. I got accepted to RISD, full tuition scholarship for the first year. The clinking of silverware against plates stopped. My father slowly set down his fork. "The art school?" he asked, though he knew perfectly well what RISD was. "Yes, one of the best in the country," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother took a sip of water. "Well, that's nice, dear. But have you considered something more practical? Perhaps with your grades, you could still apply to a few state schools with good graphic design programs. Something with more career prospects." My brother snorted. "Yeah, because what the world needs is another starving artist." Thomas, my mother warned, though there was little force behind it. My father cleared his throat. "Son, we just want what's best for you. Art is a fine hobby, but as a career, the statistics don't lie about employment rates." The conversation moved on to my brother's upcoming baseball tournament. My news dismissed like an unpleasant odor that had momentarily wafted through the room. That night, I lay awake, wondering if maybe they were right, if I was making a terrible mistake, but the thought of abandoning my passion felt like contemplating giving up oxygen. My early years at RISD were both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who saw art not as a frivolous pursuit, but as a vital form of human expression. My professors challenged me to push boundaries to find my unique voice. But I also struggled with imposter syndrome, haunted by my family's doubts. Was I really good enough? Was I wasting my time on a path that would lead nowhere? Financial difficulties compounded my stress. My scholarship covered tuition for the first year only, and while my parents had robust college funds for all three of us, they made it clear that they thought my choice was unwise. They provided the minimum financial support they felt obligated to give, which meant I took out loans and worked part-time jobs that ate into my studio time. During my sophomore year Christmas break, my brother got his early acceptance to Johns Hopkins Medical School. The holiday dinner turned into an hours-long celebration of Thomas's accomplishment. Champagne-flowed relatives called to congratulate him, and my father gave a tearful toast about carrying on the family legacy in medicine. When my aunt politely asked about my studies, I mentioned winning a departmental award for a mixed media piece that had been displayed in the student gallery. "That's nice, Ezekiel," my mother said quickly, before turning back to my brother. "Thomas, tell everyone about that research opportunity Dr. Friedman mentioned. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. My achievements were footnotes. My siblings were headlines. It was during my junior year that I met Jasper, a music composition student from the neighboring Brown University. We met at a campus coffee shop where I was sketching patrons, and he asked if he could see my work. Unlike my family, he looked at my sketches with genuine interest, asking questions about my techniques and inspirations. Our relationship developed quickly, built on mutual respect for each other's creative pursuits. The Thanksgiving when Jasper joined our family gathering was a disaster I should have anticipated. He arrived dressed in his usual eclectic style, sporting bright blue hair and multiple earrings. My parents' tight smiles and overly formal greetings were just the beginning. Throughout the meal, they peppered him with questions that felt more like an interrogation than conversation. "And what exactly does one do with a music composition degree?" my father asked with poorly disguised skepticism. "I imagine the job market must be challenging." When Jasper mentioned his family owned a small independent record store in Providence, my mother exchanged a look with my father that spoke volumes. Later, as we were having dessert, my aunt asked about my senior thesis project, which I was actually excited to talk about. Just as I began explaining the multimedia installation I was planning, my brother interrupted with a story about a cadaver dissection from his anatomy class. Everyone at the table immediately turned their attention to him, fascinated by the gory details. I felt Jasper's hand squeeze mine under the table, a silent acknowledgement of what had just happened. In the car ride back to campus, Jasper was unusually quiet. When I asked what was wrong, he hesitated before responding. "Ezekiel, do they always treat you like that? Like what you do doesn't matter?" His question pierced through the normalization of my family's behavior. Hearing someone else name it made it impossible to ignore. "I guess I'm used to it," I said quietly. "Well, you shouldn't be. You're talented, passionate, and hardworking. They should be proud of you." Our relationship lasted another 6 months before the strain became too much. Jasper couldn't understand why I still sought approval from people who seemed determined not to give it, and I couldn't explain the complicated bonds of family that kept me tethered to that hope. We parted on good terms, but his absence left me questioning even more about my place in the world and my family. Graduation came and went without much fanfare. My parents and siblings attended the ceremony, but there was no celebration dinner afterward. No champagne toast like there had been for Rachel and would be for Thomas. Just a quick lunch at a chain restaurant near campus before they headed back to Boston, citing an early morning commitment the next day. My first major professional failure came about a year after graduation. I had been working odd jobs while building my portfolio and finally landed a small showing at a local gallery in Providence. I poured everything into preparing for it, creating a cohesive collection that represented months of work. The opening night saw a decent turnout, but as the 2-week exhibition continued, not a single piece sold. The gallery owner was kind but direct. "Your work shows promise, but it's not quite connecting with buyers yet. Keep refining your voice. Sometimes it takes years to find commercial success." Easter fell during the final week of my failed exhibition. Back at the family home, I braced myself for the usual interrogations about my career progress. What I wasn't prepared for was walking into the dining room to find my exhibition flyer, which I had mailed to my parents, being passed around as a source of amusement. "Look at these prices," my uncle was saying with a chuckle. "Ambitious, isn't he?" My father shrugged. "Well, as far as I know, nothing has sold, so perhaps a lesson in market value is being learned." They hadn't even attended the showing. They had just mailed the flyer to extended family with what I can only assume were mocking comments. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom surrounded by the few pieces of art my parents had allowed me to hang on the walls, I hit what felt like rock bottom. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe I was destined to be the family embarrassment, the cautionary tale parents told their children about following impractical dreams. But something in me refused to accept that ending. I thought of Mrs. Lambert of Professors, who had seen promise in my work, of Jasper's belief in my talent. I thought of the moments when I lost myself in creation, when time disappeared, and I felt truly alive. There was value there, even if my family couldn't see it. I made a decision that night that would change the course of my life. I would prove them wrong. Not for their approval anymore, but for myself. I would find a way to succeed on my own terms. The path wasn't clear yet, but the determination was solidifying inside me, like iron forged in fire. After the gallery showing disaster and that humiliating Easter, I knew something had to change. Not my passion for art, but my approach to making a living from it. I spent weeks researching, talking to successful artists and designers, and analyzing where my strengths could be marketable. The answer became clear. I needed to pivot to graphic design and digital media areas where my artistic vision could meet practical business needs. I took out another loan and enrolled in an intensive 6-month digital design program in Boston. Living back in my hometown was risky given my family situation, but financially, it made the most sense. I rented a tiny studio apartment in Somerville and threw myself into learning everything I could about digital design software, web design, typography, and user experience principles. The program was grueling, but transformative. I discovered that my fine art background gave me a unique perspective on design problems. While other students created functional but ordinary work, I brought an artistic sensibility that made my projects stand out. My instructors took notice, and by the end of the program, one of them connected me with a small design agency that was willing to take a chance on me as a junior designer. The pay was terrible, and the hours were long, but I was finally getting paid to be creative. I soaked up every bit of knowledge I could volunteering for additional projects and studying the work of the senior designers. After hours, I continued developing my personal style, creating a portfolio site, and taking on small freelance gigs whenever possible. After a year at the agency, I made the leap to freelancing full-time. It was terrifying, but the steady stream of small projects from my agency connections gave me just enough confidence to try. The first 6 months were a financial nightmare. I ate a lot of ramen, worked 7 days a week, and constantly fought the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my father saying, "I told you so." That Thanksgiving was particularly brutal. I had been freelancing for about 8 months at that point, barely making enough to cover rent and student loans. As usual, the conversation around the table focused on my siblings' accomplishments. Rachel had just been made the youngest partner at her law firm. Thomas was thriving in his residency and had published a paper in a respected medical journal. When attention reluctantly turned to me, my aunt asked politely about my little design business. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. It's still early days, of course. These creative careers take time to establish if they ever do. The "if they ever do" hung in the air like a bad smell. My father nodded sagely. There's always a place for you at the hospital, son. Administrative roles don't require medical training. The benefits are excellent. I tried to explain that I was building a client base, that these things take time, that I was actually making progress. But no one seemed interested in the details, and the conversation quickly shifted back to Thomas's paper. It was during the dessert course that it happened. My uncle, loosened by several glasses of wine, shook his head and said it the words that would become both my deepest wound and my greatest motivation. Every holiday, it's the same story with you, Ezekiel. New city, new job, new scheme. You're always the embarrassment of this family. When are you going to grow up and get a real career like your brother and sister? The table fell awkwardly silent. No one defended me. My mother murmured something about different paths, while my father studied his pumpkin pie with sudden interest. My siblings looked uncomfortable, but remained silent. Their silence hurt almost as much as my uncle's words. I excused myself from the table, locked myself in the bathroom, and stared at my reflection. "You're always the embarrassment" played on repeat in my head. I could have crumbled in that moment. Instead, something hardened in me. Those words burned into my consciousness and transformed from an insult into fuel. I returned to the table, finished my dessert with a polite smile, and made an internal vow this would be the last holiday where I would sit and take their judgment. Next year things would be different. I wasn't sure how yet, but they would be. In January, I landed a meeting with Marcus Wright, the creative director of a boutique design studio whose work I had admired for years. A mutual connection from my design program had made the introduction. I spent days preparing my portfolio, selecting pieces that showed both my technical skills and my artistic perspective. The meeting was supposed to be 30 minutes. We talked for 2 hours. Marcus saw something in my work that my family never had: a unique vision. He didn't offer me a job, but something more valuable: mentorship. He invited me to use a desk at his studio, 2 days a week, gave me feedback on my work, and occasionally passed small projects my way when his studio was overloaded. Under Marcus's guidance, I refined my style and business approach. He taught me how to price my services, how to communicate with clients, and most importantly, how to bring my artistic sensibility to commercial work without compromising either. "You have a perspective. No one else has," he told me one day, as we reviewed my latest project. "Stop trying to design like everyone else. The clients who will value your work are looking for something different. Find them and charge accordingly." Following his advice, I began targeting clients in the arts, independent music labels, small theaters, and cultural institutions, places where my unconventional aesthetic would be appreciated rather than questioned. Slowly, my client base grew. Projects became more consistent, and I was able to raise my rates. By summer, I had a breakthrough. A well-known independent record label hired me to create album art for one of their up-and-coming artists. The work was challenging, but played to my strengths. When the album was released, my design received positive attention in several music publications. This led to more music industry clients creating a niche for my business that felt both creatively fulfilling and financially viable. As my business stabilized, I began setting aside savings for the first time. I still lived simply in my small apartment, but I was no longer in constant financial panic. I paid off one of my smaller student loans. I bought new design equipment. Small victories, but they felt enormous after years of struggle. Despite these successes, I kept most details of my improving situation private from my family. Experience had taught me that any success I shared would be minimized. So why give them the opportunity? During phone calls with my mother, I kept descriptions of my work vague. "Business is steady" became my standard response to inquiries. By the time Christmas arrived, I had a consistent client roster and had even hired a part-time virtual assistant to help with administrative tasks. But to my family, I was still the struggling artist, the family embarrassment. I allowed them to maintain this outdated perception, knowing that someday the contrast between their assumptions and my reality would be all the more striking. That Christmas dinner, my father asked if I had figured out a real career path yet, as if the previous year of building my business didn't count. I just smiled and said I was still working on it. Let them think what they wanted. I knew the truth, and increasingly, that was enough. The following spring marked a turning point in my career. After months of pitching and negotiations, I signed a contract with Anthem Records, one of the largest independent music labels in the country. They wanted me to redesign their entire visual identity, from their logo to their website to their promotional materials. It was the biggest project I had ever taken on, with a budget that made all my previous work seem like pocket change. The Anthem project consumed my life for the next 3 months. I worked 14-hour days collaborating with their marketing team, presenting concepts, refining designs, and pushing myself creatively in ways I never had before. The pressure was intense, but so was the exhilaration of working at this level. When the rebranding launched, the response exceeded everyone's expectations. Design blogs featured the work. Music industry publications praised the bold new direction. Anthem's social media engagement increased by 70% in the first month. The client was thrilled, and I was immediately contracted for additional projects. This success led to a cascade of new opportunities. Other music labels reached out. A boutique hotel chain commissioned me to design environmental graphics for their properties. A craft brewery asked me to create a series of limited edition label designs. Suddenly, I was turning down more work than I was accepting, allowing me to be selective and focus on projects that aligned with my creative vision. Throughout this period, I developed a distinctive style that became my professional signature: bold color combinations, intricate hand-drawn elements, digitally integrated with clean typography, and a sense of movement that made static designs feel dynamic. It wasn't conventional, but it was unmistakably mine, and clients were willing to pay premium rates for it. By summer, I had to expand. I moved my operation from my apartment to a small but stylish studio space in an arts building. I hired a project manager and a junior designer. I was no longer a freelancer. I was the founder of a boutique creative studio. The financial rewards followed. For the first time in my life, I was not just stable but thriving. I paid off my remaining student loans. I started an investment portfolio. I began looking at real estate listings, not seriously yet, but with growing interest. In September, I received an email that left me staring at my screen in disbelief. My work for Anthem Records had been nominated for a prestigious industry award. The American Design Association's annual honors were the gold standard in the field, something designers spent entire careers hoping to receive. And here I was, nominated less than 3 years into establishing my studio. I didn't tell my family about the nomination. Years of conditioning had taught me it wouldn't matter to them, and I didn't want their dismissal to tarnish my pride in this achievement. The award ceremony was held in Chicago in October. I flew out with my small team, not expecting to win, but honored to be recognized. The category had 5 nominees, all established studios, with impressive portfolios. When they called my name as the winner, I momentarily froze. My project manager had to nudge me to stand. Walking to the stage felt surreal, like I was floating above myself. In my acceptance speech, I thanked my team, my clients, and Marcus for his mentorship. I didn't mention my family. At the reception afterward, I was approached by industry leaders whose work I had admired for years. They knew my work, they respected it, they wanted to discuss collaboration possibilities. It was validation, on a level I had never experienced before. Flying back to Boston award in hand, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Professional pride, certainly, but also a lingering sadness that the people who should have been most proud of me probably wouldn't understand or value this achievement. And beneath that, an uncomfortable realization part of me still craved their approval despite everything. The weekend after the awards ceremony, my parents held their annual autumn dinner party. I attended out of obligation, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and wearing a well-tailored suit that reflected my new financial status. My award and recent success went unmentioned because I hadn't shared the news. Instead, the dinner conversation revolved around Thomas's consideration of a prestigious fellowship and Rachel's recent courtroom victory. When attention turned to me, my mother asked if I was still doing that graphic design thing, as if it were a phase I might have outgrown. Yes, still doing that, I replied, simply not elaborating on the award, the high-profile clients, or the growing studio. My aunt chimed in. Well, at least it's keeping you occupied while you figure things out. Figure things out, as if I were still a directionless post-grad, rather than an award-winning designer running a successful business. That evening was clarifying. Sitting there listening to the familiar pattern of praise from my siblings and gentle condescension toward me, I realized a profound truth. No achievement would ever be enough. No success would ever change their perception of me. The problem wasn't my career choice or my level of accomplishment. The problem was that they had cast me in the role of family disappointment, and they were committed to that narrative regardless of reality. The next day, I called a therapist whose number I had been carrying in my wallet for months. Dr. Simmons specialized in family dynamics and adult children of high-achieving parents. Our first session was revelatory. As I described my family's pattern of behavior, she nodded with recognition. What you're describing is a common dynamic in families with rigid definitions of success, she explained. In some families, children are assigned roles early on, often unconsciously. It sounds like you were assigned the role of the different one, or the creative one, which in your family's value system translated to the less successful one. But why maintain that narrative when I'm objectively succeeding now, I asked. Because changing it would require them to question their entire value system and admit they were wrong. It's much easier to maintain the existing narrative even when evidence contradicts it. Over the next several months, Dr. Simmons helped me understand that my family's treatment of me wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their limitations. She helped me set healthier boundaries and release my need for their validation. Most importantly, she helped me see that continuing to seek their approval was a form of self-harm. You wouldn't repeatedly put your hand on a hot stove, would you? She asked during one session. Yet you keep placing your self-worth in the hands of people who have consistently devalued you. Setting boundaries began with small steps. I started declining some family invitations, prioritizing my own well-being over obligation. When I did attend gatherings, I limited my time and had an exit strategy prepared. The Christmas party was the first major family event I declined. I had a legitimate reason, a deadline for a significant project, but in previous years, I would have worked around the clock to make both work. This time, I simply sent my regrets. The reaction was swift. My mother called, voice tight with disapproval. "Christmas is for family, Ezekiel. Your brother and sister both managed to make time despite their busy careers." "I'm sorry, Mom, but this project can't be rescheduled. I'll try to stop by before New Year's." "This is very disappointing," she said before hanging up. What followed was a barrage of texts from family members ranging from guilt-inducing. "Your grandmother was so looking forward to seeing you," to outright angry way to ruin the holiday for everyone. The intensity of the reaction only confirmed that my role in family gatherings wasn't as a valued member, but as a necessary component in their established dynamic. I spent Christmas Day working on my project in peaceful solitude, ordered my favorite takeout and video, called a few close friends. It was the most relaxed holiday I had experienced in years. As my business continued to thrive, I began seriously considering purchasing a home. Boston's real estate market was expensive, but with my steady income and savings, it was now within reach. I started viewing properties initially, condos and small apartments. But my real estate agent, Linda, encouraged me to consider houses slightly outside the city. "With your creative eye, I think you'd enjoy having a space you could really make your own," she suggested. She was right. As soon as I started looking at houses, I could envision the possibilities for renovation and personalization. After viewing about 20 properties, I found a mid-century modern house in Lexington with floor-to-ceiling windows, an open floor plan, and a large yard bordered by mature trees. It needed updates, but the bones were perfect. The house represented more than just a place to live. It was tangible proof of my success. A success achieved entirely on my own terms. When my offer was accepted, I felt a profound sense of vindication. The family Embarrassment now owned an architectural gem in one of Boston's most desirable suburbs. As I signed the closing documents, I thought about those words that had both wounded and motivated me. "You're always the embarrassment." Now sitting in the real estate office finalizing the purchase of my dream home, those words had lost their power. I wasn't an embarrassment. I was a success story, whether my family recognized it or not. Walking through the empty rooms of my new house later that day, I had an inspiration. This house deserved a proper introduction to the world. A housewarming party would be the perfect way to celebrate this milestone and the journey that had led me here. But not just any party. A statement, an announcement, that Ezekiel Montgomery had arrived on his own terms. And in that moment, I knew exactly who would and would not be on the guest list. Planning the housewarming party became a creative project in itself. I approached it with the same attention to detail and aesthetic vision I brought to my design work. This wasn't just a social gathering. It was a statement, a celebration of my journey, and yes, a calculated move in the complex game of family dynamics. First, the guest list. I wanted people who had genuinely supported me and contributed positively to my life and career. Marcus and his wife were at the top of the list. My team from the studio, clients who had become friends. Fellow designers and artists I respected. Dr. Simmons, who had helped me navigate the family trauma. Friends from RISD and my design program. Even Jasper, who had remained a supportive friend despite our breakup years ago. I also included extended family members who had shown me kindness over the years. Aunt Sarah, who had always slipped me art supplies as birthday gifts, even when my parents thought it was encouraging an impractical hobby. Cousin Michael, who had defended my career choice during a particularly tense family dinner. Uncle David, my mother's brother, who had always treated me with the same respect he showed my siblings. Conspicuously absent from the list were my parents, brother and sister. The people who had labeled me the embarrassment would not be invited to celebrate the success they had never acknowledged. For invitations, I collaborated with a letterpress printer I knew, creating custom cards that showcased my design style while conveying all the necessary information. The cards were works of art themselves, with a blind emboss of the house's silhouette and hand-mixed ink, in my signature deep teal. I included a personal note in each one, thanking the recipient for their role in my journey. Next came the house preparation. I had been gradually furnishing and renovating since closing, but the party accelerated my timeline. I painted the main living spaces, installed new lighting, and refinished the original hardwood floors. Each design choice reflected my aesthetic, from the bold gallery wall, showcasing work by artist friends, to the custom shelving units I designed for my record collection. The backyard required significant work. I cleared overgrown areas, installed string lights in the mature trees, and created a patio space with rented furniture where guests could gather. A local landscape architect friend helped me design simple but effective garden beds that would mature over time. For catering, I hired a former RISD classmate who had become a successful chef known for creative presentation. Together, we designed a menu that was as visually striking as it was delicious. Signature cocktails were named after pivotal moments in my career journey: the freelancer, the breakthrough, and the award winner. Music was curated by a DJ friend who had been one of my first clients years ago when he needed posters for his club nights. He understood the vibe I wanted, a mix of laid-back and celebratory that would evolve as the evening progressed. The social media strategy was perhaps the most calculated aspect of my plan. I knew that while my immediate family wasn't invited, they would inevitably see the celebration through our overlapping social networks. I created a custom hashtag for the event, Ezekiel Housewarming, and encouraged guests to use it when posting. I made sure the event information mentioned my design studio's success as the reason I could afford such a beautiful home. As the RSVPs rolled in, the guest list grew to about 70 people. It was the perfect size, large enough to feel like a significant event, but small enough to maintain the intimate, curated feel I wanted. Almost everyone I invited accepted, many expressing excitement about finally seeing the house they had heard me talk about. The day of the party arrived with perfect early autumn weather, crisp and clear. The catering team arrived in the morning to begin preparations. The florist delivered arrangements in the color palette I had specified. The bartenders set up their station on the patio. Everything was coming together exactly as I had envisioned. I dressed carefully in an outfit that projected successful creative professional: dark jeans, a tailored blazer, and a limited edition pair of sneakers from a collaboration I had worked on with a footwear brand. As I moved through the house making final adjustments, I caught my reflection in one of the large windows. For a moment, I saw myself through the eyes of the guests who would soon arrive. Successful, confident, at home in this beautiful space, far from an embarrassment. The first guest arrived at 6, and soon the house was filled with conversation, laughter, and music. Marcus brought a vintage bottle of champagne, which we opened with a toast to dreams realized on your own terms. Jasper brought his new partner, both of them genuinely happy to see how far I had come. Aunt Sarah hugged me tightly and whispered, "I always knew you would do amazing things." The party flowed exactly as I had hoped. People moved between the house and garden, admiring the design choices, the art, the architecture. Conversations connected people from different parts of my life, creating new relationships. The food and drinks received rave reviews. The playlist hit just the right notes of nostalgia and celebration. Throughout the evening, phones were out, constantly capturing the beautiful space, the food, the gathering of interesting people. I saw the hashtag being used, photos being posted in real time. I knew the digital footprint of this celebration was growing, spreading through social networks, inevitably reaching the uninvited family members. Around 9, cousin Michael pulled me aside. "Your parents have been texting me nonstop asking about the party," he said, showing me his phone. "They saw Aunt Sarah's post and want to know why they didn't get an invitation. What should I tell them?" I took a sip of my drink. "Tell them whatever you want. Or nothing at all. It's not your job to explain my guest list." He nodded, understanding the subtext. "This is an amazing place, Ezekiel. You've done incredibly well. They should be proud." "Their pride isn't what I'm seeking anymore," I replied, surprising myself with how true it felt in that moment. As the evening continued, more guests mentioned similar messages from my uninvited family members. My sister had commented on a photo, asking why she hadn't known about the party. My brother had texted a mutual friend asking for details about my house. My parents were apparently calling various relatives, trying to understand their exclusion. Rather than diminishing the celebration, this background drama added a layer of satisfaction. For once, they were the ones on the outside looking in, wondering why they weren't included, seeing evidence of a success they had never acknowledged. By midnight, the party had exceeded my every expectation. As the last guests departed, many, with heartfelt hugs and congratulations, I stood in my living room, surveying the beautiful aftermath, empty glasses on side tables, rearranged furniture from animated conversations, the lingering scent of good food and flowers, evidence of a night well celebrated. I scrolled through the social media posts tagged with my hashtag. Dozens of photos showed smiling faces in my home, artistic shots of the architecture and decor, flattering comments about the host and his success. The digital record of the evening was exactly what I had hoped for, a public documentation of this milestone that stood in stark contrast to the family narrative about my choices and path. As I crawled into bed that night, physically exhausted but emotionally exhilarated, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Tonight was perfect. You've built something remarkable both in your career and your home. This is just the beginning." For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely validated in my choices, not because I needed others' approval, but because I had created tangible proof of my vision's value. The house around me, the career I had built, the community I had gathered, all existed because I had refused to accept the role of family embarrassment. I fell asleep thinking not of those who were absent, but of those who had shown up literally and figuratively throughout my journey, and it was enough, more than enough. The morning after the party, I woke to a phone full of notifications. More photos had been posted overnight, friends tagging me in their favorite moments from the evening. Comments praising the house, the food, the overall experience. It was a digital afterglow of a successful celebration. Among these notifications was a text from my sister Rachel. "Saw pics of your house on Facebook. Didn't realize you were doing so well. Why wasn't I invited to your party?" Her message was the first direct contact from my immediate family regarding the event. I didn't respond immediately, taking time to enjoy a quiet coffee on my patio, scrolling through more photos and appreciative messages from guests. By midday, the digital ripples had clearly reached all corners of my family network. My brother Thomas texted next, "Nice house, bro. Weird to find out about your big purchase from Aunt Sarah's Facebook page. Mom and Dad are pretty upset about the party thing." Again, I chose not to respond right away. This was new territory for me, not jumping to explain or apologize. Dr. Simmons and I had discussed this moment, anticipating the family reaction and preparing a response strategy that maintained my boundaries while avoiding unnecessary cruelty. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. My mother. I took a deep breath and answered. "Ezekiel, what is going on? Why are we seeing pictures of some elaborate party at a house we didn't even know you bought?" Her voice had that familiar tone, the one that suggested I had committed some grave social error. "I purchased a house in Lexington last month. I had a housewarming party last night with friends and colleagues." "And family," she added sharply. "I see your Aunt Sarah was there. And Uncle David. Even your cousin Stephanie from Chicago flew in. Were we the only ones not invited?" The directness of her question deserved an equally direct answer. "Yes. You, Dad, Rachel, and Thomas weren't invited." A stunned silence followed. "Then I don't understand. What have we done to deserve this kind of treatment? Your father is hurt. I'm hurt. Mom, when was the last time any of you showed genuine interest or support for my career or life choices? When have you celebrated my successes the way you celebrate Rachel's and Thomas's? That's not fair. We've always supported you. Do you remember Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when Uncle Robert called me the family embarrassment, and none of you said a word in my defense?" Another silence. "He was out of line, but you know how he gets after a few drinks. He didn't mean anything by it. Whether he meant it or not, it was just a more direct version of what I've heard from all of you for years. That my path wasn't valid, that my success wasn't real success. That's simply not true, Ezekiel. Isn't it? When I won the American Design Award last year, an honor in my field equivalent to Thomas publishing in a medical journal, did any of you even acknowledge it? I didn't tell you about it because I knew you wouldn't." "Kare, how could we acknowledge something we didn't know about?" she asked, her voice defensive. "That's exactly my point, Mom. You didn't know because I stopped sharing my life with you years ago. because it wasn't safe to share with people who consistently devalued my choices. The conversation continued in circles for another 20 minutes. My mother alternated between defensive justifications and attempts at guilt. By the end, we had reached no real resolution, only a clearer understanding of the divide between us. Later that day, my father called. His approach was more direct than my mother's. "Your mother is very upset, Ezekiel. I think you owe her an apology for this party business." "I don't agree, Dad. I don't think I owe anyone an apology for celebrating my success with people who have actually supported me." "What's that supposed to mean?" "We've always supported you." "Have you?" "When I told you about my first major client, you asked when I was going to get a real job. When I moved into my first studio space, Mom suggested it was an unnecessary expense for a hobby business. You've never once visited my studio or asked to see my work." A heavy sigh came through the phone. "We may not understand your artistic pursuits, but that doesn't mean we don't support you as our son. There's a difference between tolerating someone's choices and actively supporting them, Dad. You and Mom have done the former, not the latter." The conversation ended stiffly with my father suggesting I think about the family's feelings and consider making amends. Social media continued to be the most fascinating arena for the aftermath. Extended family members who had attended the party posted glowing comments about the evening and my accomplishments. In response to these posts, my parents began leaving comments that portrayed themselves as proud, supportive figures in my life. "So wonderful to see our son doing well with his design work. We've always encouraged his creative talents," my mother wrote on Aunt Sarah's album of party photos. "The house looks magnificent. No surprise that Ezekiel has such a good eye for design. He gets that from his mother's side of the family," my father commented on Uncle David's post. These public performances of parental pride stood in stark contrast to their private messages to me and their historical treatment of my career. The disconnect was so obvious that several relatives called it out directly. "Interesting that you're suddenly so supportive of his creative talents when you've been dismissing them as impractical for years," Aunt Sarah replied to my mother's comment. "Funny, I recall you telling me last Christmas that you worried Ezekiel would never amount to anything with that art hobby," Uncle David responded to my father. The public nature of these exchanges added a layer of accountability that had never existed in our family dynamic before. Friends and colleagues who had known me for years chimed in with stories of my hard work and talent, creating a chorus of voices that countered the family narrative. Most surprising was a private message I received from my brother Thomas a few days after the party. "Hey, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I want to say I'm sorry for not standing up for you more over the years. It was easier to go along with Mom and Dad's favoritism than to challenge it. Seeing your success now, the house, your business, it's made me realize how wrong they've been about you. And how wrong I've been too. If you're open to it, I'd like to try to be a better brother moving forward." His message caught me off guard. Of all the family reactions, this was the one I least expected. Thomas and I had never been close. Our relationship defined more by comparison and competition than connection. His acknowledgement of the family's treatment felt like validation from an unexpected source. I responded cautiously, thanking him for his message and expressing openness to rebuilding our relationship, but making it clear that it would take time and consistent effort on both our parts. Rachel's response took a different form. She posted a passive-aggressive status update without naming me. "Funny how some people think material success erases years of family loyalty. Houses come and go, but family is forever." Several relatives immediately connected the dots and defended me in the comments, creating another public family argument that spilled across social media for days. The most meaningful responses, however, came from unexpected corners of my extended family. Cousins I hadn't been close with reached out to share similar experiences of feeling judged or sidelined within the family structure. An older aunt wrote a touching email about how proud she was of me for forging my own path, despite the lack of family support. These connections felt like the discovery of allies I hadn't known I had. As the digital dust began to settle, I felt strangely liberated. The hidden dynamics of our family had been brought into the light. The narrative that had constrained me for years had been challenged publicly. There was no going back to the way things had been, and that was exactly what I wanted. The party and its aftermath had accomplished what years of private conversations never could: a public reckoning with the truth of our family dynamic. My success was visible and undeniable. My exclusion of my immediate family was a boundary statement that couldn't be ignored. The support I had gathered from others was evidence that I wasn't the problem in the equation. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was operating from a position of strength in relation to my family. I wasn't seeking their approval or validation anymore. I was setting the terms of our relationship moving forward. It was a seismic shift in power that left me feeling both anxious and empowered. As I settled into my new home in the weeks following the party, I realized that the house represented more than just a real estate purchase. It was a physical manifestation of the space I had created for myself, separate from the constraints of family expectation. A space where I could define success on my own terms and surround myself with people who recognized my value. The family embarrassment had become the family success story, whether they chose to acknowledge it or not, and that knowledge was enough. 3 weeks after the party, I received a text from my mother asking if I would meet her and my father for coffee. After consulting with Dr. Simmons, I agreed, suggesting a cafe halfway between their home and mine. This neutral territory felt important, a physical representation of the new boundaries I was establishing. The cafe was busy when I arrived, which provided a certain safety in public. My parents were already seated at a corner table, my father looking uncomfortable, my mother nervously arranging and rearranging the sugar packets. I ordered a latte before joining them, taking my time, no longer rushing to accommodate their schedules and preferences. "Thank you for meeting us," my mother began when I sat down. "We've been doing a lot of thinking since everything that happened." My father cleared his throat. "Your exclusion of us from your housewarming was pointed. We got the message." "I'm glad," I said simply, not rushing to fill the uncomfortable silence that followed. My mother looked at my father, clearly having rehearsed this conversation. "We've realized we may have been less supportive of your career choices than we could have been." "Less supportive," I repeated. "That's one way to put it." "Now, Ezekiel," my father started, his tone defensive. "We always wanted what was best for you. The medical field, law. These are proven paths to success and stability. Our concern came from a place of love." I took a sip of my latte, considering my response. Dad, concern for my well-being would have looked like learning about my industry, asking questions about my work, celebrating my achievements. What you and Mom showed wasn't concern, it was disapproval and dismissal. "That's not fair," he replied immediately. "We supported you financially through that art school. The minimum obligation you felt as parents, yes, but emotional support, recognition, those were reserved for Rachel and Thomas." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We never meant to make you feel less valued than your siblings." Intent doesn't erase impact, Mom. For years I was treated as the family embarrassment. Do you have any idea what that does to someone? How that shapes their sense of self-worth? She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "I'm sorry you felt that way." "I didn't feel that way. I was treated that way. There's a difference." The therapy with Dr. Simmons had given me language for these distinctions, ways to redirect the conversation away from my perceptions and back to their actions. My father, ever the pragmatist, seemed eager to move beyond apologies to solutions. "So where do we go from here? What do you want from us?" It was a fair question, one I had given considerable thought to in preparation for this inevitable conversation. "I want acknowledgement of the past. Real acknowledgement, not just, 'sorry you felt that way.' I want respect for my career and life choices moving forward. And I want new boundaries." "What kind of boundaries?" my mother asked cautiously. "I'll attend family gatherings when I choose to, not out of obligation. I expect my professional accomplishments to be given the same weight as Rachel's and Thomas's. And I need both of you to speak up if relatives make disparaging comments about my career or choices." My father frowned. "That seems a bit dramatic." "Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like the bare minimum for a healthy relationship." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, cycling through decades of family dynamics, miscommunications, and hurt feelings. My father remained largely defensive, occasionally acknowledging specific instances where he could have been more supportive. My mother seemed genuinely pained by the realizations of how their treatment had affected me, though she still struggled to take full responsibility. By the end, we had reached a tentative understanding. Not a complete resolution, not a perfect reconciliation, but a first step toward a more honest relationship. They agreed to visit my studio the following month to see my work firsthand. I agreed to join them for dinner afterward. Small steps toward rebuilding on more equal terms. In the months that followed, my professional success continued to grow. My studio expanded to a team of 6, taking on increasingly prestigious clients. I was featured in several design publications and invited to speak at industry conferences. Each achievement reinforced my confidence and validated the path I had chosen. My relationship with my family evolved slowly. My brother Thomas made genuine efforts to connect, visiting my house for dinner and showing interest in my work. We discovered common ground we had never explored. As competitive siblings, building a relationship based on adult friendship rather than family obligation. Rachel took longer to come around. Her identity had been so tied to being the successful one, the one who made the right choices, that my success challenged her narrative as much as our parents'. Eventually, though, professional respect became a bridge between us. As a lawyer, she began to understand the business side of my work, and grudging respect evolved into genuine admiration. My parents remained the most complex relationship to navigate. Old habits died hard, and they occasionally slipped back into dismissive comments or backhanded compliments. But now I called these out immediately, refusing to let them pass unchallenged. And slowly, they began to catch themselves, to make efforts to see my world through a less biased lens. 6 months after the party, we had a small family gathering at my house. Nothing elaborate, just dinner and conversation. What struck me most was the different energy in the room. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't performing, or defending, or minimizing. I was simply existing in my space, comfortable with who I was and what I had built. After dinner, my father asked for a tour of my home office, where I had examples of recent projects displayed. He studied them with genuine interest, asking questions about my process and clients. It wasn't effusive praise or dramatic acknowledgement, but it was authentic curiosity, which felt more valuable than any overcompensation. "You've created something impressive here, Ezekiel," he said simply. "On your terms. I respect that." Those words, delivered without qualification or comparison, meant more than any grand declaration could have. The journey from family embarrassment to respected adult wasn't completed in a single conversation or even a single year. It was an ongoing process of establishing boundaries requiring consistent reinforcement. Some family gatherings still held moments of tension. Some relatives still didn't fully understand or value my work. But the difference now was that I no longer sought their validation to feel successful or worthy. My house became a sanctuary and a symbol, a physical manifestation of a success achieved entirely on my own terms. Each room reflected choices made with confidence rather than doubt. Each space held memories of support and connection from the community I had built around me, a chosen family that supplemented the complicated biological one. The most profound change wasn't in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. I no longer carried the weight of being the family disappointment. I no longer measured my worth against their narrow definition of success. I had learned that self-validation was more sustainable than external approval, that boundaries were necessary for healthy relationships, and that sometimes the greatest act of self-love was walking away from those who couldn't see your value. For anyone who has been labeled the family embarrassment, the black sheep, the disappointment, I want you to know this. Their inability to appreciate your path says more about their limitations than your worth. Success isn't measured by conformity to others' expectations, but by building a life that brings you fulfillment and allows you to contribute your unique gifts to the world. Creating boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Finding your people isn't disloyal, it's essential. And sometimes the family that truly nurtures you is the one you build through friendship, mentorship, and mutual respect rather than the one you're born into. My journey from family embarrassment to self-assured success wasn't about proving them wrong, although that satisfaction certainly existed. It was about proving myself right, about trusting my vision when no one else could see it, about building success on my own terms. If my story resonates with you, if you felt the sting of family disappointment, or the weight of being the one who never quite fits, I hope you'll take this away. Your path may be different, but different doesn't mean wrong. Your talents may be unconventional, but unconventional doesn't mean worthless. Your success may not look like what others expected for you, but it's no less real or valuable. Have you ever been the family embarrassment or black sheep? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their different path is just as valid. Thank you for letting me share my journey with you. And remember, the only approval you truly need is your own.